The story of America's auto industry in the mid-2020s is one of grand promises and brutal consequences. It began with a political declaration wrapped in populist fire, an oath to restore Detroit to its former glory and bring back jobs that globalization had scattered across borders. A new president stood before cheering workers and promised an industrial renaissance, swearing that not a single plant would close, that every lost job would return, and that America's auto empire would once again rule the global stage. His chosen weapon was the tariff, a blunt instrument of economic warfare. A sweeping 25% levy was placed on foreign steel, followed by an equally punishing tax on cars and parts not made in the United States. Factories cheered, unions toasted, and executives whispered of a long-awaited rebirth. But what began as a celebration of national pride quickly unraveled into a slow-motion crisis. Prices climbed at dealerships, supply chains twisted and broke, and layoffs trickled across the heartland. The very policy meant to deliver salvation had instead planted the seeds of betrayal. The auto workers who raised their glasses in hope suddenly found themselves caught in the crossfire of an economic war, their livelihoods hanging by a thread as the clock ticked toward disaster. The tariffs hit with both surgical precision and crushing blunt force. Almost overnight, the cost of buying a new car in America began rising at a pace not seen in a generation. Ford, the most iconic of U.S. automakers, warned investors that steel tariffs alone would drain more than $1 billion from its profits. Honda, long reliant on cross-border supply chains, reported hundreds of millions in new expenses. Domestic steel mills, newly shielded from global competition, seized the moment to raise prices by as much as 50%, leaving U.S. steel more than $100 per ton costlier than imports. By autumn, hot-rolled steel prices were 40% higher than just a year earlier, an increase that rippled through every corner of the industry. Analysts estimated that tariffs on cars and parts would tack an additional $1,760 onto the sticker price of every vehicle sold in America. Families walking into dealerships noticed price tags creeping upward, $750 more here, $2,000 more there. For many already struggling with inflation and debt, the dream of a new car began to vanish. What had been pitched as protection for American jobs was now a slow bomb detonating in showrooms and driveways, transforming the act of buying a car into a punishing test of endurance. Inside Detroit's boardrooms and factory floors, uncertainty spread like wildfire. For decades, the North American auto industry had been an intricate web, with parts crisscrossing borders before final assembly. The new tariffs tore at that fabric. No one knew which contracts would be taxed next or which shipments would be stranded at ports. Investment plans were shelved, hiring frozen, and contingency blueprints stacked higher than ever. The Center for Automotive Research projected that the tariffs would cost automakers nearly $18 billion in a single year. Ford suspended its financial guidance entirely, admitting it could not predict the storm's path. General Motors slashed its profit outlook by billions. For a sector built on precision planning, the chaos was paralyzing. In Ohio, Michigan, and Ontario, whispers of layoffs began to echo in break rooms. It wasn't foreign competition or global recession this time, it was a self-inflicted wound, a trade policy miscalculation threatening to topple an empire that had once been America's pride. Foreign automakers began retreating from the American market as if it were a battlefield. Volkswagen abruptly halted all U.S. imports of its vehicles, waiting for clarity before exposing itself further. Jaguar Land Rover stopped shipping SUVs for an entire month, pausing to strategize around the tariffs. Nissan's Infiniti division suspended Mexican production of 2 SUV models destined for America, leaving factory floors eerily silent. Volvo abandoned its Chinese-built S90 sedan in the U.S. altogether, unwilling to face tariffs that ballooned above 100%. Dealers across the country stared at dwindling inventories as shipments dried up. America, long considered the most lucrative car market on earth, was suddenly radioactive. Boardrooms from Tokyo to Munich concluded that it might no longer be worth the risk. The paradox was undeniable. Tariffs meant to shield U.S. industry were driving international partners and competitors away, leaving American consumers with fewer choices and factories with fewer orders. The pain stretched from raw material suppliers to neighborhood dealerships. American assembly plants now paid world record prices for steel and aluminum as tariffs allowed domestic mills to gouge without competition. The Auto Alliance, representing U.S. carmakers, warned bluntly that higher costs would make them less competitive against rivals building abroad. That prophecy quickly became reality. Foreign automakers, unburdened by U.S. tariffs, enjoyed a growing cost advantage, while American companies were forced to hike sticker prices or swallow losses. Consumers, squeezed by the rising costs, flocked to used cars or simply sat out the market altogether. Sales plummeted. For a brief moment, panic buying spiked as families rushed to purchase cars before prices climbed further, but by summer the silence in showrooms was deafening. America's grip on the global auto market slipped as rivals from Asia and Europe picked up customers elsewhere. Detroit, once a titan of industry, was ceding ground at home and abroad. By spring, the consequences rippled across oceans. At Yokohama's port in Japan, thousands of brand-new cars sat untouched under gray skies, awaiting buyers who never came. Shipments to the United States collapsed by 72% compared to the year before. Factories in Mexico, Japan, and Canada slowed to a crawl, their parking lots overflowing with unsold inventory. Nearly half of all cars once sold in America were imports, and that lifeline was fraying. U.S. dealers, squeezed between rising costs and dwindling supply, began consolidating showrooms. Meanwhile, America's share of the global auto market shrank visibly, turning the nation from a magnet for vehicles into an island cut off from the world's supply chains. Rivals in China, Korea, and Europe seized the opening, accelerating production for other markets while U.S. automakers bled cash at home. The tariffs were no longer a policy experiment, they were a tectonic shift in global trade, reshaping where cars were built, bought, and sold. The financial toll was catastrophic. General Motors revealed that tariffs could wipe out up to $5 billion of its annual profits, a staggering blow for a company still haunted by memories of its 2008 bankruptcy. Ford, though more insulated by U.S. manufacturing, still projected a $1.5 billion loss. Toyota braced for a $1.2 billion hit in just 2 months of turmoil. Honda slashed its yearly profit forecast by 70%, anticipating a $4.4 billion loss. The cost gap between U.S. firms and their foreign rivals widened by the day, with American companies forced to burn billions on tariffs while competitors reinvested in research, electric vehicles, and automation. Wall Street, once bullish on Detroit, turned wary. Investors quietly concluded that companies with the largest U.S. footprint were now at a disadvantage compared to those producing abroad. Ironically, tariffs designed to protect the Big Three had instead tied weights to their ankles while competitors sprinted ahead. Desperate for relief, automakers sought refuge beyond America's borders. Ford, in a stunning move, announced a $3 billion investment to shift production of its iconic Super Duty pickup trucks to Oakville, Ontario. For generations, the Super Duty had been the ultimate symbol of American labor and grit. Now, beginning in 2026, it would roll off Canadian assembly lines. Ford framed the decision as a way to meet surging demand, but the subtext was clear: Canada's trade environment was safer, cheaper, and more predictable. The move secured nearly 2,000 Canadian jobs that might have been American. Ford also exploited customs loopholes, routing partially assembled trucks through Canada to dodge direct tariffs. These maneuvers saved the company nearly $1 billion. For Detroit, the symbolism was devastating. Even the most American of trucks was no longer safe from being outsourced. Canada seized the moment. Ottawa offered lavish subsidies to lure automakers spooked by U.S. tariffs. Volkswagen accepted $13 billion in Canadian incentives to build a massive electric vehicle battery plant in Ontario, a facility that, under normal circumstances, would have landed in Michigan or Ohio. Stellantis followed suit, expanding engine and battery operations on Canadian soil. The gravitational pull of North American auto manufacturing shifted northward. Meanwhile, the U.S. doubled down, escalating tariffs on steel and aluminum to 50%. Analysts warned this would add up to $3,000 to the cost of every car.